And then my webcam. Can you see me now? Can you hear me now? So, I mean, does XP stop working just because it's retired? So, certainly, welcome to New Horizons. And I guess one of the first things you have to ask yourself is how many XP machines do you have anyway? So, if you have tens, well, you probably don't have a really big issue. I mean, your machines don't stop working when they stop producing updates for them. If you've got hundreds, well, then you've got a bigger issue. If you've got thousands, you've got a substantial issue. And what this webinar is all about is what path might you take with the XP systems that you're still running. So where we're eventually going is we're going to be looking at operating system deployment. Certainly we're going to be talking about the steps that get you there and what you need to be thinking about, what kind of knowledge is required to take those steps. So on our agenda, we're going to start with who is New Horizons and why would we be running this webinar, and then we'll do the presentation, and then I've got some demos where I'm going to make a run past something called the Application Compatibility Toolkit that Microsoft produces so that you can determine whether or not your applications will run on, say, Windows 7 or Windows 8. And then we'll be taking a look at something called Windows Deployment Services that for organization with tens or hundreds of machines might choose to automate the process with something that's already built into the current versions of Windows Server. And then finally, we'll take a quick look at something called System Center Configuration Manager Operating System Deployment, and then we'll entertain questions. So certainly New Horizons has been around for a considerable period of time and is a proven worldwide training provider. So you can get training from New Horizons just about anywhere on the planet. In fact, I've got a class running right now where I have students from Anaheim to Boston, and so certainly, the fact that we have the largest international network and a total of 2,100 classrooms and 2,400 instructors across 56 countries, and we've got 3 million student days of training per year. So there's lots of ways you can get training from New Horizons. You might choose to sit in a classroom with an instructor. However, those days are rapidly changing where frequently you're sitting in you're sitting in your office or you're sitting in your home and you're interacting with an instructor and asking questions and going through material and doing labs. Of course, then we also have, the online live virtual delivery where you really, it's still ILT in spite of the fact that you're not in the classroom with the instructor. There's significant interaction. And then, we do private group training. So New Horizons has strong vendor partnerships with a number of different organizations. So how about the webinar? So what are the considerations with XP? I mean, it doesn't stop working just because Microsoft stops patching it. So do you need to be moving on? What are the major issues? If you are going to be moving on, then, will your hardware support it? In fact, are you already having hardware issues because you're finding new hardware doesn't support XP anymore? What about your applications? And then how would you get there? So where do you go to? So certainly the basic questions are you going to stick with XP? I mean, XP doesn't stop working. They're going to continue, so Microsoft will continue to update endpoint protection or security essentials if you're running those. Most of the third-party vendors have all said that they're going to continue to deploy patches for XP. gee, for those of you that deploy XP on a regular basis because your end users blow it up, and gee, I got a user, they've infected this thing so badly I can't fix it, so I'm going to redeploy it. Will you be able to activate it? Sure. Microsoft's not going to turn off the activation servers. They're not going, so people have said that. In fact, I participate on a photography forum where somebody said, hey, Microsoft's already stopped activating XP. No, they haven't. What you've got is you've got a flaw with the genuine Windows advantage, and just go look here at this knowledge base article and fix it, and quit spreading rumors that Microsoft's pulling the plug on XP. Certainly, security is going to be an issue, but security is an issue either way. The fact that there will no longer be updates for XP means that if somebody finds a significant flaw, you're going to have to be more vigilant to keep them out. So certainly, if you're going to make the move, well, okay, so certainly the new hardware frequently doesn't have drivers anymore for the NT5s, which were Windows 2000 and Windows XP, as opposed to the NT6s, which, okay, so sorry, NT60 is Vista and Server 2008. NT61 is Server 2008 R2 and Windows 7. NT62 is Windows 8 and Server 12. And then Server 2012 and Windows 8.1 are actually NT6.3. So generally speaking, almost all of the new hardware only supports the NT6s. So if you're buying new hardware, then you're going to have a mix. You're going to have users going back and forth between Windows 8 or Windows 7 and XP, and then keeping your applications running on both. And then certainly there's lots of new applications, as well as memory architecture issues where basically 32-bit operating systems ran out of steam at about 2 gig. If you wanted to go to 4 gig with a 32-bit operating system, you couldn't even see all 4 gig, so you were wasting money on memory. So, newer applications that require more RAM than you can put into a 32-bit machine pretty much means you ought to be thinking about 64-bit, either Windows 7 or Windows 8, and, security issues will never go away. We connected all of our systems to the internet, and you've still got end users sitting at workstations that are potentially clicking on things. So, yeah. So what about hardware issues? I mean, if you're going to stay, you're going to have driver issues with new hardware. If you're going to make the move, well, are there so if you have existing hardware and you're planning on installing Windows 7 on it, do you have or can you get the appropriate drivers for the systems that you're currently using, or are you going to have to replace your systems in order to move to Windows 7 or Windows 8? Certainly, do you have enough CPU? Do you have enough RAM? Do your display adapters support? And so, tracking down your hardware issues and tracking down your application issues. So how are you going to know if your applications are functional on Windows 7 or Windows 8? Are there ways to make them work? So many applications, they installed on XP, they install on Windows 7 or Windows 8, they work just fine, there's no issues. Some of them are using features that have been deprecated. So if a feature no longer exists in Windows 7 or Windows 8 and they make that call, then it's not going to be there and they're not going to work. So there are certainly applications that need some kind of remediation or a patch released by the vendor, or in some cases the application will just have to be replaced. I mean, there is a strange thing where with Windows 7 Enterprise, Microsoft has a tool that allows you to basically run an XP virtual machine inside of a Windows 7 machine, but you don't have to switch desktops to that virtual machine, so you don't have users that are confused as to where they are. the applications that are running on the XP machine appear in the start menu of the Windows 7 machine, so it's relatively seamless to get users connected to applications that are still running on XP in spite of the fact that they've made the move to Windows 7 or Windows 8. Certainly, you'd have to be living under a rock not to recognize that there's lots of virtual desktop infrastructure out there. So there's all kinds of people with all kinds of VDI solutions that will allow you to, on a Citrix farm or a terminal server farm or in some kind of VMware or Zen virtualized environment, run your XP applications without having XP on every desktop. So if you're going to make the move, how do you go about deploying Windows 7 or Windows 8? So certainly, considerations include going door to door with the product DVD that doesn't scale particularly well. So if you've got 1,000 machines, it's going to take a lot of money to hire enough people to come in and go door to door. So Microsoft provides a couple of solutions that we're going to take a look at. There's Windows Deployment Services, which is it's a role that you can install on Windows Server. And then they also would be glad to sell you System Center Configuration Manager. That's not to say that those are the only possible solutions for deploying large quantities of Windows 7 or Windows 8. There's certainly third-party solutions out there as well. But what we're going to take a look at here and spend a few minutes going through so before you make the leap, it would be really good if you knew that your hardware and your software supported Windows 7. And then we'll take a look at Windows Deployment Services and talk about what that might do for you so far as deploying Windows 7 or 8. And then we'll take a look at the interface of System Center Configuration Manager operating system deployment and talk about how that might work for you. So let's see if I escape out of here and in my start menu. So when you download, so you go to Microsoft and you download the application compatibility toolkit, and you get a couple of tools. One of them is the Application Compatibility Manager, and, all right, where's the other one? The Application Compatibility Administrator. So this does require SQL someplace, and you have to install SQL in order to go through the discovery process. So basically, the starting point is you go to collecting and you create a package that then you run on systems within your organization. So I've got a couple of different packages that I've created here. It creates a Windows installer. So you've got an installer that you then run on your systems that collects data and then sends that data back to the compatibility toolkit. So once you create those packages, then you configure it, and sorry, I don't have any reports yet because the default was 8 hours and I fired it up this morning, and yeah, I'm sorry. I'm teaching today, so I didn't have a chance to babysit this thing, but the information that the Application Compatibility Toolkit comes back with is basically information about your devices, so you can see, what computers you have, and you can generate reports that will tell you whether or not, so basically it's going to monitor your systems, and then it's going to return that information back to the compatibility manager so that you can determine which applications you have And it's not just Microsoft applications. This thing has extensive knowledge of all kinds of applications. So much knowledge, it's going to take it a week to open. Nice. So it is highly likely that whatever applications you have, it already has knowledge of. For many of those applications that require some kind of compatibility fix, this is in, the compatibility fixes are included in the application compatibility toolkit, and you just apply the fixes, and then you can run your applications on Windows 7 or Windows 8. So generally that tool allows you to determine whether or not your systems and your applications are compatible with Windows 7 or 8. And then what about deploying them? Oh, so let's see. That's interesting. So this would be one of the tools that Microsoft has to deploy operating systems. So this is a Windows server. This particular one is, okay, so it calls itself NT61. This is a Windows Server 2008 R2 server, and it has this tool called Windows Deployment Services installed on it. And the Windows Deployment Services interface allows you to configure the ability to boot computers to the network and use a boot image, which there's none here now, but adding it is pretty straightforward. You choose Add Boot Image. You need to know where you have your Windows 7 or Windows 8 product DVD. I had one here. Oh yeah, I do. There's the product DVD right there. So in the product DVD, there's this Windows image file called bootwim, and gee, it's about that hard. Of course, then is this boot image going to have all of the drivers that will boot to your systems? Well, probably not, but that means you're going to have to go out to your vendor's website and download the appropriate drivers, and then install those drivers so that you can boot your systems. And then you can either use, most people don't want to deploy the default image of Windows. We could certainly right-click and add an install image, and that was that install WIM that was in the folder. But more likely, you'd want to either install Windows and build yourself a mule, for lack of a better word, and then use that mule to deploy, multiple copies. So you would take an image of that system after you had sysprepped it, and you'd have your install image, and then you'd set up multicast transmissions, and you'd basically multicast new images out to all of your systems. And then you'd have to run around and make sure that everything worked okay, and for things that don't support booting to the network, or if you've got a large organization, there'd be additional steps. But then Microsoft also has something called System Center Configuration Manager, and in System Center Configuration Manager we have a relatively similar interface with a whole lot more functionality. So in operating system deployment within System Center Configuration Manager, we have the ability also to import drivers and then set up driver packages and build out operating system images and set up installers, so basically running setup exe for those of you that have issues with some governmental organization or auditors where you have to have everything well documented. This also uses boot images, but then this one has this mystical thing called task sequences that allow you to simplify the whole process of deploying multiple operating systems to thousands or tens of thousands of systems. So generally speaking, Config Manager scales considerably better than the alternative, Windows Deployment Services. Well, so either way, so then the next choice or next step is to determine whether or not training would be appropriate. So certainly, if you're looking to deploy Windows 7, there's a class for that. So there's 6292, installing and configuring the Windows 7 client. That one covers some of the components we just talked about. It talks about Windows deployment services. It talks about the configuration component for the Windows 7 client. If you're thinking about deploying Windows 8, there's 2415, which is actually a much broader and, well, covers considerably more topics about Windows 8 and how you use Windows deployment services, and you've got labs in there where you actually do that. Of course, if you're planning on deploying tens or hundreds of thousands of copies of Windows, it's likely you've already considered System Center Configuration Manager, and 10747 is the class that covers operating system deployments for Config Manager. So that takes us to our question and answer portion. So do we have any questions?
So it looks like we have a question from Mike asking, is there a central database that the info is sent to?
A central database, so in the application compatibility toolkit, yes. So it actually requires that you be running some version of SQL. Of course, I have SQL Express installed here that, I installed this morning. So, yeah, the answer to that is that when you create those, so when you go to collect and you run the package itself so it reports back to basically the server that you set it up on and generates a database that gets stored in SQL that is then accessed. So it allows you to use those reports and keep track of, and then you can go in and classify and categorize all of your applications. So does that answer the question?
So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up the presentation for now. I just put in the chat box, but we have recorded this session. We'll be uploading it to YouTube so you can review it at a later time. And I've also uploaded the slide deck that Paul used to the internet, and I put the link in the chat box right now as well. So if you need to review that, you can go ahead and use that. If there are any other questions, I know Paul and I will stick around for a couple more minutes, but otherwise I think that's about it, unless you have something to add, Paul.
We're all good. Thanks.
Okay, so
And
we'll
thanks
stick
for
around.
coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. We'll stick around for 2 or 3 more minutes if there's more questions. But otherwise, thank you for coming and have a great afternoon.